Hello, everybody. If you're just coming in, I can see the number of participants creeping up. Welcome, welcome. We're going to start in 5 minutes or so. While you're waiting, if you just want to put your job title and the company that you're from in the chat, if you're happy with people seeing it, just to say hello so we know that who we're talking to. And maybe I'll watch the chat as it comes in. Hello to everybody who is joining just now. Welcome to the very first episode of the webinar. Oh, wow, we can chat right back. Hi, everybody. We're in the chat right now, just putting in our names and job titles. If we come into the room, just to tell everybody who we are as we join, so we know exactly who we're speaking to. Fantastic localization manager at International SOS. Is that the SOS? Is that like the official organization? Well, welcome anyway. It's very good to see people filing in. A few people so far. I suppose we've not had the turn of the hour yet, which is when I expect the bulk of people to arrive. I think we're going to start with the actual speaking at 2 minutes past. So very excited for that.
Does this mean that everyone who's currently on this call are the people who managed to sneak out of their existing meetings?
I believe so, yeah. It's a great quality to have. Hello, everybody who is just coming into the call. As you arrive, if you want to, do put your job title and kind of company name in the chat so we know who's here in the room with us. It'll help our speakers orientate what they're going to say, and also it'll just give us a sense of who we're talking to. Hello from Localize. Good to see the partners in. Hello to everybody just joining us. If you have just joined, come on in. If you want to put your name and job title in the chat, sorry, not your name, your company name and job title in the chat, and then we will know who is talking to a little bit. We've got some great companies have signed up, I know, so it'll be exciting to see them come through. Hello, Nesta. How are you doing? What country is Anthony Inc. from? In Colombia. Very good. Welcome. It's pretty early in the morning where you are, so thank you very much for joining us. Hello, Brittany. Good to see you on the call. Hello to everybody just joining us. We're going to start in a couple of minutes, but as you join the room, if you want to put your job title and your company in the chat, just so everybody gets a sense of who else is on the call. There's some amazing companies joining, I've seen from the sign-up form, so very, very exciting to see them join the call. And see the number creeping up a little bit. Hello to everybody just joining us. We're just putting our job title and company in the chat, just so everybody knows who else is on the call. If we feel open to doing that, we're going to start in a couple of minutes. Hello and welcome everybody just coming in. If you are just arriving, if you want to put your job title and your company name in the chat, just amazing to see who else is joining us, and maybe where you're from as well. We've got somebody from Colombia in. I know we've got loads of people from the US. It can be very difficult to get the time zones right with these things. It's 5 p.m. here in the UK. Hello, Philippa from London. Hello to everyone just joining us. If you have just joined us, we're going to start in 2 minutes, 2 minutes out from the beginning. If you want to put where you're joining us from and your job title, your company in the chat, it'd be great to see everybody. Hello from Argentina. Another early morning join. Welcome from Argentina. What time is it in Argentina now? Must be 9 a.m. I think.
No, it's later.
It's later.
Probably 4 hours later, I think. No,
it's one of those things where I sort of think of it as diametrically south of the US, but it's actually not. It's offset east, isn't it?
Yep.
Very good. Cool. So shall we get started, do we think? I know I want to sort of hold it open for longer before we go, but I know that there's so much we've got to get through today. So I think we'll have to crack on now. Hello, everybody. Hello and welcome to the very first episode of The Alignment, the webinar which asks our speakers to align on different localization topics. My name is Adam. I'm a content marketer. I'm hosting The Alignment. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the webinar series and how it came to be and who our speakers are. Before I do, I'm just going to tell you very briefly about global app testing and why it is that we're doing this. So if you haven't heard of global app testing, and I know that lots of people in localization haven't, we are a community of software testing professionals. There's just less than 100,000 of us around the world, and most of the work that we do with clients is either helping them release really high quality software, or is helping them to understand their product experiences wherever their users are live around the world. We're in 190 countries and territories. The reason that we're doing this is because we're not super well known in the localization space. A lot of our work that we've done is with product teams, but more and more what we find is that the most exciting work that we do and the work where we feel we make the biggest impact is helping teams from this kind of starting point of global growth and helping understand their product experiences wherever they're live to help drive that growth. So this is just to say hello. We are here. We're going to be doing a series of these conversations, which we're really excited about. If you want to talk more to us, I'll put a link and all of that stuff at the end. But in addition to sharing a little bit of our own expertise, we also want to hear all about your expertise, which brings me to the format of the alignment, the way that it works and the way that it's unusual for a webinar. So we have 4 amazing speakers, but in addition to hearing from them, we want to hear from you. So while they're each going to have 6-7 minutes to talk about a subject close to their hearts that's under this kind of localization leadership major topic, I want you guys to ask loads of questions, because we're going to dedicate the entire second half of this webinar to a Q&A, to a panel, where your questions will be asked directly to our panelists. If you want to ask a question, can I ask you to do so via the Q&A button, which should be somewhere under me. There's only 2 buttons, so it can't be too hard to miss. But use that chat box. It's 2 little speeches talking to each other, and ask questions as many as you can throughout. We will get to a huge Q&A section at the end, where we'll try and go through as many as possible. Our 4 speakers today. So the first speaker we have talking is Ronald Cummings-John. Ron is the co-founder and CEO of Global App Testing. I've known Ron for a little over a year now, and he brings tremendous expertise to this topic. He's going to be talking about evolving your localization maturity from service to strategy. So the kind of headline topic of this talk, we're giving over to Ron. Second on our list, we have Talia Baruch. Talia is the founder of Global Sake. Global Sake is a community of localization professionals. If you've not checked them out, you should check them out. They do events. You should be going to them. They're amazing. We've had the chance to go to a couple. Talia is previously the head of international product management and new market strategy at LinkedIn, and also has worked at SurveyMonkey and Google as well. She's going to be talking about building a more inclusive product strategy for your users, which is really exciting. Third, we've got Catel Jeantreau. Catel is an independent consultant. She has previously been the head of localization at Box and the globalization manager for LATAM and language program management at Netflix. And she's going to be talking a little bit about how a more strategic team will impact your operations, not iterations. And then finally, last but not least, we've got Thomas. Thomas is a solutions architect at Localize. I've got a couple of questions for Thomas about how localization leaders will use tooling, but I want to get off the stage now and pass the mic. That's enough from me. I am going to pass directly over to Ron to talk a little bit about our first topic. Thank you very much, Ron.
Okay, so here we go. I am here to talk about the 3 stages of localization maturity. But to give you some context as to how this all came about, I'm the co-founder of Global App Testing, as Adam has said, and we essentially have a crowd of like 90,000 testers around the world, and we support many of the apps that you use on your phone right now to make sure they're working all around the world. And I never understood this maturity story until something happened several years ago. And several years ago, we were doing a test for a customer in Indonesia, and the company was struggling to grow in Indonesia at the time. And in their application, they had it that every user needed to have compulsory first name, last name, and email address as they signed up. And when we did a test in the country for them with users who are from Indonesia, one of the testers reported back that there is an error here because it was forcing them to have a surname. And for those who know about Indonesia, not everyone has a surname in Indonesia. And so that particular issue that wasn't understood by the team in America meant that they weren't getting the level of growth they wanted in that country. And when we ended up working with the customer to fix that issue, their whole management team started to go, what? We can use testing to help us grow in countries? Are you kidding me? And all of a sudden, we started to help with this whole view of how do we help with what we call a narrative. And that's a narrative for us is how do people think about and talk about your department? And to get better at this, we traveled the world for 2 years and we spoke to all of the heads of engineering, CPOs, CTOs to understand what makes great leadership when it comes to building better quality applications. And over those 2 years, we wrote a book on it. And the book became an Amazon bestseller called Leading Quality. And one of the messages that I think is most important for everybody on this call is this idea about the narrative of your department inside your company. And so what is a narrative? A narrative is a collection of the stories that people talk about in terms of what your team does, how good are they, and whether there's value in what you do. And we often see that there are 3 types of narratives that exist inside the localization space. The first is when a team has what we call a delivery narrative, which is everyone looks at them as the team that is delivering some form of localization. The second is what we call the investment narrative, which is where people start to look at the work you're doing as being an ROI and a true investment that's going to add even more value to the company. And the third is that it's a strategic team that is really help with which country should we be growing in and how do we better grow in particular countries and having kind of conversations with management. So let me jump into those super quick just to give you an idea about some of them. So the delivery narrative is what I think is where most people start, right? So they start by being very operationally focused to make sure that we are able to deliver translations and text and LQA to our engineering teams. And this usually involves optimizing the workflow. But really great leaders often go past just being having a delivery narrative of what their team are doing. And when we start to see things getting interesting, we see that they start to have more of an investment or an ROI narrative. And they start to look at the work they're doing from a revenue generating perspective, or at least showing that the work they're doing is having a great effect in the company. And so an example of this, we were working with an e-commerce company the other day, and we found an issue in France, and it was on all Android phones in France, they were having issues with MasterCards. And so instead of just saying, hey, there's an issue in France, what they ended up doing was they started to size it. So they said, well, 74% of Android users, 7% of people in France use Android, about 10% of those use MasterCard. Put in all the numbers in the maths, it turns out that this was like a £700,000 a month issue that was affecting them. And so now, way more people were beginning to listen to them about the work they were doing because they were showing that ROI and they were trying to demonstrate that there is so much value in the work that they were doing. And then the third narrative is one of my favorite because it's more of the strategic narrative. And this is really asking the question of yourself and your teams about how can you start to have a more strategic impact on your business. And usually to do this, you have to think broader than just the department that you're in. And you are often advocating the local users to everyone inside the company. I often talk about this concept called a local persona. When we speak with our marketing teams, they always have these broad personas. They might have 2 or 3 inside your company. But what we have to deal with in our industry is that every user in every location in the world, pretty much on every device and operation system combination, they expect the application to work perfectly for them. And so how do you start to think about that for your users and really advocate that? And when you start to work more strategically, you are often having to influence higher up in the organization. So they sometimes say that you're always relegated to who you sound like. But by having more of those ROI related conversations, you're going to be appealing to people higher up inside the organization. We often see people working more cross-functionally because ultimately to get a lot of these things, a lot of these changes happens, it's more than just the localization or internationalization department that have to deal with it. So the better you are at building relationships across the organization, the easier it is to do. And we start to see that sometimes people look into what's happening with their competitors and they do competitive benchmarks and other things like that to truly understand what's going on for their users. And so I just wanted to quickly talk about this concept of a narrative and have people begin to think about what's the predominant narrative that currently exists inside your team. And as you listen to a lot of the cool things that I know the speakers here are going to be talking about, there's going to be so many cool tips and ways to think about how do you start to move yourself into these investment and these strategic narratives. And so that was what I wanted to share. And hopefully there'll be some questions as we get into the Q&A at the end.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ron. So I am going to say 2 things on the back of that. The first is that a couple of the ideas there that Ron referred to are in our localization playbook, our localization leadership playbook. There are links right now being posted in the chat by our team, so you can access that if you're interested in finding out more. Please ask us questions, ask Ron questions in the chat, but I'm also going to turn the tables on you now and ask everybody here a question. We're going to launch a poll just to see, because I think it's super interesting what Ron's been saying. What do you think is the dominant narrative about localization in your business? Please do just respond to the question. I'm going to keep it open for the next 2 speakers and then close it at the end. And we will have a little look and see whether we think that we're reflecting what we expect. Anyway, without any further ado, I'm going to hand straight over to Talia now, who's going to be talking about building an upfront inclusive product strategy. Over to you, Talia.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Global App Testing team, for inviting us. Hello, everyone. I'm Talia. So briefly, the first decade of my career was dedicated to adapting content, so localization, adapting content to international segments. And then the second decade of my career was dedicated to adapting the product experiences to new markets. Today, I'm an independent consultant helping companies maximize adoption in new markets. The end goal, really, as in our industries and the different functions, the end goal is to launch products that are discoverable, usable, and valuable for the diverse populations of the world, right? So what does that mean? If I'm a user, can I find you in my market, through the ecosystem channels? I found you, can I use your product? You've translated the interface, you've localized, maybe even adapted the creative content, the marketing material, all the assets. Does search work? Does the relevancy algo for recommendation system work in my ecosystem? Autofill, right images, all of those things. As an example, I interface on both English and Hebrew. When I type on iPhone, I start typing, the system autofills the rest of the auto-completes, right, the sentence. I type a word, a glyph or the image pops up that I can use to pull for interactive conversations. I don't have any of those features in the Hebrew interface, right? I found you, I can use the product well, all the features work well. Do I care, right? So within the competitive landscape of my market, how does your offering stand out? And do you actually solve for a specific problem that relates to my market or to the top sectors or to the specific use case scenarios within my market, right? So a lot of companies take the same paradigm, the same problem solving for the US, the whole value proposition of the product, and then simply render it in different languages. But the actual intent and the goals of the performance of the product does not necessarily match the markets. So when I work with companies, I basically split it into two main paradigms or pillars. The first is global readiness. So global readiness. So there's no such thing as a global strategy, right? There's a global ready strategy, and then there's a geo-fit strategy. So global ready helps us land in new markets. A geo-fit helps us adopt the remainder headroom growth in a priority specific market. And that's where we need to integrate more the regional, the cultural factors, truly understand our customers within the cultural context of their regional environments. Adam, if you can jump over to the previous slide for a second. So with global readiness, it really touches those three areas. So platform, the backend, and the mid-tier need to be adaptive. Really, I would say global readiness in general, if you want to concise it in one word, it's adaptive, right? To have an adaptive mindset, to quickly be able to pivot a direction, an adaptive backend and mid-tier, so that we can render the relevant product experiences on the front end UI UX based on the user geolocation, language interface, specific use case scenarios, and so on. So let's break it down for a second. So and then global readiness with people relates to the org structure. So I'll break it down first from the platform perspective. Things like microservices, cloud native AI networks, dynamic simulators for mobile QA with in context, in layout QA, all these many CSS and all these many many enablements that enable us to adaptively dynamically deploy, render the relevant experiences on the front end. In people, companies are typically structured in functional verticals. International is an extremely horizontal effort. It touches on every function across the organization. And so we need to rethink a global ready org structure that can enable us to effectively align and drive core international efforts across the organization, right? So now we can jump to the next slide. And the adaptive strategy, basically, the way kind of the framework that I apply is thinking about those three core questions, right? So when we, so I would say many companies still today see localization as a tail end language support production effort. And what I've been trying to do for the past 20 years is change this paradigm and educate and change these processes within companies to expand the prism of localization and look at it as an upfront strategic lever for growth, right? And so when we think about the early phase of a product dev design, the prototyping, the ideation, we're thinking about what problem are we solving for, who are we optimizing the solution for, how do we define and measure success, right? Those three core questions are going to define the KPIs, the success metrics, and those will define the core initiatives we're gonna prioritize, right? So those things are not a blanket global. They're going to be adapted based on the market needs. And again, understanding the markets, integrating those regional and cultural factors, the user expected behavior, and a lot goes into that. I've done many hundreds of A/B testing experiments, mainly at SurveyMonkey and also some at LinkedIn. And it's amazing to see the differences in specific, optimizing for specific core funnels by market. Again, you don't have to do it for every market, but some markets have specific user expected behaviors and specific market requirements that really move the needle on that. Okay, so next slide. So just to give an example, this was in early 2016 at SurveyMonkey, I prioritized UK and Germany as top markets to focus on. UK, English market by default, early adoption market. So brand awareness, engagement exists already in the market. So the focus is more on the downstream conversion retention. And therefore, you know, what problem we're solving for, right? Therefore, we're looking more at, we're optimizing more for existing users, existing customers, and helping them, you know, lifting those downstream numbers. And also within the competitive landscape, brand loyalty, right? In Germany, it's a very different ecosystem. So as a late adoption market, by default, very low engagement, focus was simply on top of funnel, just to be discovered, and quality customer acquisition, which for SurveyMonkey, that means the second deploy of a survey is the conversion to paid subs. And so what we call quality sign up is a person who not just signs up, not just registers to the system, but actually deploys the first survey. And so all of those initiatives, so if we think about what problem we're solving for, who we're optimizing the solution for, who is the segment we're focusing on for optimization, and then this is where product GeoFit comes into play, doing two things: optimizing core funnels, optimizing discoverability, acquisition, engagement, conversion, retention, loyalty, and then you know, adapting. So adapting those core funnels, and also in some cases developing new products, new features for specific markets, like what we've done at LinkedIn. We developed specific products for India, for China, and so on. So there's a lot to say about that, and I'm sure we can you know, address more examples in the Q&A. But Adam, if you want to jump to the last slide, this is just one example of. I'm going to cut to the chase, because obviously when we do A/B testing, there are multiple iterations, and each iteration is tested separately. What you're seeing here is final products, but I'm just going to share one example just to illustrate the impact of understanding your customers within the ecosystem of the region and applying those adaptations to the product experience. So this is Germany, again, focusing on the new users, not on existing users, and focusing on top of funnel. This is 2 years before GDPR, just by knowing that German consumers are much, much more concerned with trust, transparency, and data privacy. By introducing 2 explicit user data check boxes before the sign-up CTA, that tell them exactly, you know, these 2 checkboxes take them to 3 unique links in German to tell them exactly how we're gonna use, collect, and share their data, right? So we haven't changed anything in the back end, but we're just making everything very transparent, accessible, and clear, explicit, right? Not only did we not introduce friction in the rich funnel, which again, in the US, I would never test that because we will introduce friction, guaranteed. But in Germany, we actually had a 10% incremental lift in new signups. And again, I don't see that as a success metric, because you can always put a big sign up button and people click it. I'm looking at the downstream impact based on the unique user journey. The unique user ID. And so of those new customers that clicked the sign up through this experience in Germany, 25% of them deployed a survey, the first survey, and 24 of them were new paid, converted to the paid version. And so this is just one example to illustrate the impact of those adaptations.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Catel. Sorry, Talia. I'm just going to close the poll now, just to let you know. So there's a Freudian slip. I'm getting ready for our next speaker now. So I'm going to hand straight over to Catel. The poll is now closed. We'll share the results with you after Catel talks, but straight over to you, Catel.
Hi, Adam. Thank you very much. And thanks for Global Testing for having me today and everybody who joined. So I'm Ketel, been in Loc for a long time. I'm very excited to be here. I'm going to be talking a little bit about how strategic goals impact your operation in Loc. You know, a bit of a spoiler, they do a lot and they should very much. Ronald at the beginning, talked about the different stages of maturity. And I think personally, there is still very much something that's happening around Loc where a lot of localization functions are kind of stuck in that first stage of delivery. I think the idea is to move further up that ladder and looking at a broader context. So when you think about localization and where to start, with that context, I think it's really, really important to understand that context and understand the business, understands what its goals are and the mission. If you're there mostly to deliver translated files, now I'm not saying this is not needed, and probably as part of your operations, absolutely you will need to do this, but that should not be your starting point. It shouldn't be, who's my vendor and where do I send the files? It's really understand what the business is about. I would even go as high, of course, as the mission of the business. I spent a long time at Netflix. Everybody who works at Netflix knows that the mission is to entertain the world. And that tells you a lot in terms of what your job should be as a localizer. If you work for Apple, you know that it's all about, delivering the best user experience. If you work for Google, you know that it's about, organizing data and make it accessible. So all these things matter because they will influence the way that you should think and the way that you should build your function, build your operations. So make sure you understand this. And below the mission, there are the strategic goals of the business. And they will, vary from one year to the next, maybe from one quarter to the next. And it's very important that you keep that in mind because it will help to really understand how localization fits in and how you should be thinking about your goals and how to prioritize them. Once you know this, once you know what the company goals are and you align with them, and this is not just about reading a mission statement, it's really about understanding what the overall business is working on, what is that common, strategic goals, and then spend a lot of time also talking to people, aligning with different functions, and making sure that you're in alignment as to what those goals should be. And then remember that you are not just a team, you are a function, and it's really important that you think in those ways. This is something that I credit to the great Teresa Marshall from Salesforce. I heard her say this once, that really we should think of localization, globalization as a function, because it's not just about building a team that is going to deliver stuff. It's really a crucial function within a company that is driving the business, that is helping the business, achieve their goals. So focus on that and focus on impact. How is what you're doing going to impact the business, going to impact those goals? If the business goal is to increase revenue in Japan by 10% by the end of the year, how are you going to help achieve that? And going back to what Talia was talking about, is your product able to actually bring you there? Is the product ready for Japan? I remember when I was at Box, when we first started talking about launching the service in Japan, the first thing that the Japan team asked me was, when is the product going to be ready for Japan? And I thought it had been localized before I joined, and I thought, we're in trouble. So, that's the kind of stuff that you really should be thinking about. And then, finally, just remain flexible, in terms of how are things changing and should you adapt to this? And usually the answer is yes. If the goals are changing, you should be adapting to that and adapting your goals and your effort to this. So that helps you prioritizing your efforts within localization. I would think that it's very, very important, again, that the goals are clear to everyone. Goals should not just be there, to be put on a deck and then you present to your exec. They should also be very clear to everybody in the team so that everybody is working towards the same goal and has the same focus. Adapting to the changes in strategy, I touched on this. Businesses will change. All of a sudden they will tell you in 6 months' time we're going to launch games on the service when nobody was thinking about that before, and all of a sudden you need to drop everything, and that's the priority for the business, and you should be focusing on that. So it really helps you in a way, making sure that you're doing the right thing. It doesn't prevent you from saying, actually, this strategic goal is going to be, we need to think about these points in orders of execution because of international customers and how that's going to fit within the bigger picture, but that helps you to really focus your strategy. The cross-functional partnership, I touched on this. This is all about understanding how the other teams are working, what their goals should be, and making sure that you are very much aligned with it. And then the final thing I would touch on, which is actually very, very important in my book, and I've learned a lot on this, especially in the time that I was at Netflix. You really should think very strategically about how you hire. We often say always hire smarter than you. That is very, very much true, but also hire people that fit what you are trying to achieve. If you want a function and a team that is flexible and can adapt easily, hire people that have that mindset. Hire people that are thinking strategically and not just about deliverables, but really about the bigger picture and how it fits within the business. So these are the points that I wanted to raise, and thank you for your time.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Catel. So I'm going to share the results of the poll, but I'm going to share them after I've asked Tom a couple of questions. Thomas is joining us from Localize. He's a solutions architect. He represents a wealth of expertise around some of the TMS solutions and the way that they affect localization leadership. So a question for you, Tom. I'm just interested in this difference between like a really sophisticated localization team that's maybe in like a strategy narrative versus a less sophisticated localization team from a tooling perspective, and like how do you find that those different kinds of teams might use tooling differently based on their level of localization maturity?
If we speak about maturity, it's important to separate basically technological maturity and localization maturity. And only the best of the best can mix it together. We have some of these customers reaching that level, but in terms of localization maturity, it's really about monitoring the quality, being able to invest reasonable amount of effort and money into maintaining and monitoring the quality of the content as such and quality of the process, basically of the conduct.
When you said localization maturity versus tooling maturity, that there's a difference. Can you just separate that out for me? How do you think of those?
Yeah, technologically advanced companies, they are usually keen to automating the things and automating processes as much as possible, but they don't pay much attention to the overall quality of the translation of their content. For them, it's important to get the content out translated as easy or as quickly as possible, without much investment, without any internal hurdles or basically problems. So they usually invest into integration into tools, whereas during the time when they become more aware, and in quite a hard way, that they face some complaints from their end users that there is some problems with the translation, with the level of support, with their documentation. So they realize, hey, if we want to succeed, we probably need to invest more into it, and they start realizing, hey, we can invest into LQAs, we can invest into monitoring the quality of our translation memories, invest into consistency, you know, and that kind of data hygiene. So they usually become mature this way.
And are you seeing any trends in like the way that localization teams that are signing up for Localize as a whole are kind of using the tooling? Is there something different that the team wants now?
If I can name some of those, let's leave AI besides for a while, because this is definitely the hot topic that everybody here would like to hear about. I would like to touch basically two aspects that I learned during past few years. It's basically that TMS environment serves not only for the translation but also for the content delivery. Being part of a backend, basically tech stack that is able to provide over-the-air content to apps and platforms. So that kind of automation, so you can really change something in the background easily, and it will get propagated to your UI in a very comfortable way. So that's one thing. Another thing is design led localization. If you imagine the whole chain of the life cycle of translation, starting with UX design, their implementation, and then translation, then you are basically taking the last piece of the workflow and putting it forward, and in between UX design and implementation. So it's much faster, it's much more agile, and at the same time you're converting the traditional role of TMS into kind of collaboration platform between UX designers and developers and translators, of course.
Fantastic. And final question then. So I am going to ask one question about AI. I know basically I don't want this whole thing to descend into an AI conversation. And the reason for that is that I know that it can, I know that the topic has that power. So I propose that we're going to ask one question now, because a few people have asked questions, and then we'll move on as we get into the topic and go back to the main topic of the day. So AI then, how do you, obviously it's going to affect localization and the way that we do translations and all of these things. Can you give us the vision for how you think that it might?
I really believe that it has a potential to reshape and redesign the traditional paradigms and change the localization industry completely. My vision about that we will soon experience a huge amount of content, AI generated, that will not be humanly possible to translate. So a rise of the of NMT as well as AI generated target content directly, will see, you know, massive amount of increase of that content. At the same time, AI will play crucial role in monitoring the quality. Something that you can imagine that right now, when companies dealing with huge amount of content, it's usually based on the human LQA performed to get a sense what's going on, what's the quality of the content. But it takes time and it's quite costly. And imagine that the content is not doubled, not tripled. It's 10 times more, and you will become basically blind in terms of quality, what you are dealing with. So AI will play crucial role in saying, this is the part of your content that is rather questionable and requires some attention. So you can assign human linguists, hey, let's review only this part, and to be able to maintain the quality of all your content.
Very good. Thank you very much, Tom. So it's a pleasure to kind of move on to the Q&A for everybody now. As I do that, I'm going to do two things. The first, I'm just going to leave this on the screen while we talk a little bit. These are the forthcoming episodes of the alignment. And I can reveal that the episode 2, which is about building a team and putting together a team, it has opened for registrations. We've got heads of localization at Notion and Stripe, and we've got the localization manager at Deliveroo. So it's going to be a really fantastic episode. And then second, as I invite the speakers to react, I'm going to just share the results of our poll. So looking at the localization narratives, we've got the majority, more than half of the respondents have a delivery narrative, and then about even investment and strategy narrative, and 6% say they've got something else. Does anybody want to jump in and respond to the poll? Is that what we expected? Is that in line with what we would expect, or did we think something else was going to be the result here?
I'm not that surprised. It's a bit sad, but yes, I think that's aligned with my expectations. I think, as I said, the look industry generally is still not everyone, of course, and there are companies that are doing a great job at getting out of it, but it's still very much in the service mindset, and is not necessarily aware of the power that it has. So. Yeah, not that surprised to see this.
And I think a lot of that comes from really how companies are structured, right? So even if there is awareness, and often there isn't, then the company is not organized in a way that can effectively align international OKRs with every other function's OKRs. I'm curious about the other narrative. Maybe someone can put in the chat, those two folks. What is the other narrative that your company applies?
Absolutely. Cool. I'm gonna just jump into some of the questions that we have been getting in the Q&A box. So one person asks, how can you measure the degree of localization of a site or app or product for a specific market? Is there a way to quantify that? Does anybody want to jump in with an answer to that one?
I can start with that. I think it's it really depends on the market. It depends on your goals. So you do have to do market research, user research, qualitative, quantitative, implicit, explicit, right? I found that A/B testing is a very effective tool, as well as collecting even something like from customer support. From the CS team, our CS team was in Dublin. I would travel there very often, and actually would insert chatbots, well, not bots, but chats, actually human staffed chats that the CS team would manage, and I would just want to sit with them and see. So we would introduce those in friction funnels, like moving people from pricing to checkout phase 1, and then through completed orders. In some markets where we had those friction, where people would drop off, high drop-off rate, and just looking at not just the. So if you look at CS tickets, you know, what do people are most concerned about, and slice that by country. That's a very insightful information to then drive your decisions of the top initiatives to optimize for in that specific markets, as well as what people are not saying, right? So if you observe people and just look at observe chat or observe in qualitative research and interviews, what people are not telling you, but where they are actually struggling with the usability moving along the funnel, that tells you a lot about where the friction might be. And I would just add one more thing is data. A lot of companies, a lot of US companies slice and dice their data into US, Canada versus the rest of the world, right? And put the rest of the world in one bucket. Obviously, this is not helpful. You're chasing the wrong sun. So you are not really, I mean, it's important to understand that international is not a country, right? And really you want a country slice. And even for markets where you are, that are higher priority, you want to actually even drill further down by sector, maybe even by region within, you know, for large countries like India, by states within the country, and really understand where the gaps are, right? So I think that gives you, you know, asking, you know, it's not enough to query. I would do a lot of, you know, SQL queries to the data warehouse, but it's how you slice how you slice the data and also what questions you are asking, and then getting that big data dump and being able to create the right narrative, create the right story around those insights to guide your KPIs and your top priorities initiatives.
I thought that was a beautiful answer.
If I can just add to this, and I 100% agree with everything that Talia said. I think, looking at the data and where the gaps are, very important. That should guide your strategy there. The other thing is that I think it's also important, and maybe that's not the first thing you're going to think about if you build a function or you join a team, but also ask yourself, like, do we need to localize here or there? Like, is that needed? Is that something that our customers need? Or are we localizing too much or in the wrong places? So this, looking at the data and being guided by what the customers are telling you will help you, tailor your strategy there. But it's not always about doing more. Sometimes it can be about doing a bit less.
I wanted to add on everything that's already been said. We often do functional testing in different locations, which tells us a lot of whether it's localized, because sometimes it doesn't even work in the country. Full stop, let alone what the user interprets its use case to be. And that always fascinates me, because sometimes we run functional tests as well as usability tests alongside it to get that intel. But I wanted to challenge the person that asked the question, because as I look at the question that was asked here, and the question was, how can we measure the degree of localization of a site or an app for a specific market? The question in and of itself is a delivery narrative question, because the question is there to look at how can we do and measure the delivery. And an additional question to ask on top of this one, which then raises the conversation up, is what are the most important strategic markets we have to go to, and how are we measuring towards those? Because really then you're actually saying, well, if we as a company have agreed we want to grow 10% in Japan, then the real measure is how close are we to the 10% in Japan from the work that we're doing, as opposed to just looking at, what is the degree of localization we have in that country, because all of the work we're doing is for the end goal of growth in the company. So I just wanted to challenge the person, or at least have them think about alternative questions they can ask on top of the one that they had there.
Thank you very much.
Can I just add one? I think it's right on top to what you just said.
One little thing, and then because I want to go
small. Sorry, I think it's important. So one of my clients years ago, it's a two-sided marketplace, and they came to me with a specific problem. So sometimes the problem you think, the data that you follow and the goal, the KPI you follow is the wrong KPI, right? So it happens. It's very, very common. So they wanted to lift, paid pros. So they have professionals and homeowners, lift paid pros in specific international markets. Well, really in all international markets, because they saw that their revenue, more than 70% of their revenue is actually in the US, Canada, and only 30% in international. But looking at that, looking at the data and slicing it by country, I actually saw that the percentage of their paid professionals by country out of the general pool of professionals within the country. In that scenario, if you ask that question, it's a very different insight. Then you actually see that in Japan, Germany, and Spain, I think it was, it's double that percentage of the US and Canada, right? So it tells you a very different. So how you slice and dice, again, just to illustrate that point, gives you a very different KPI, very different understanding of your gaps. So I think that's really important.
Thank you very much. So in terms of the questions that have been asked, there's a couple of different themes that I can see emerging. One of them is about getting senior buy-in, right? So it's all very well saying we should be strategy narratives, but how do you get the buy-in from other people? So one person asks, at what point does senior leadership start to see localization as a priority? Another person asks, what is needed to get buy-in from the product team? What is the best way to appeal from them? A third person asks, I've come across the attitude that it's a cost center or an afterthought. How do you make the shift? So I'd love advice from everybody here about how to, if you find yourself in a position where you're like, I feel like it would considered a cost center, how do you start to move towards something where you're seen as this more kind of strategic thing?
I can take a stab at that one. So I think this is something that is very common, and I don't have a magical solution for this because every situation will be different. But I think you, again, need to go back to what the priorities and the goals of the business are. If international markets, because that's what we're talking about, unless, in some cases you have a multilingual, users or members within your host markets. I mean, the US is a very multilingual country as well. If international expansion, international growth is not a priority for the business, is going to be a lot more difficult to have this conversation with leadership than if it is. I mean, one of the main reasons why I joined Netflix at the time was that I knew that the company was almost 100% focused on international expansion. And this is where the growth was coming from, because, internally it was not at saturation, but close to it. And so where else are you going to grow if you cannot go this? And then the other thing, of course, is that if you are in a B2C business, then being able to communicate with your users, with your members, with your customers in their native language is so a lot more important than it can be sometimes in the B2B, where especially if you're selling a lot of very technical components, people might be more comfortable with English. There is a lot of factors that come into this. So to come back to your questions, I think it really is important that you understand what those goals are and what the priority of the business is, so that you can talk to your leadership in the language that they understand, which is around international expansion and growth. And it's not always very straightforward. You might need to do some research around that, but that's how you should really think about those conversations. Don't know if anybody will add anything.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that. Also, Giselle, love the passion for the fact that we can help growth happen in our companies, because that is really what is so exciting about this industry.
Yes.
Like most of saturated their existing market, and the work we do literally helps them grow. But we don't talk about it from that perspective. And I think that, in my mind, is the first way that I've seen people get out of the cost center narrative problem, which is they begin to tell more ROI stories about their work or about what they're finding. And ironically, they don't change what they're doing. They just articulate it to explain that it has this level of value, like some of the examples I was talking about earlier. And another thing I wanted to share was this whole relationship building. One thing that I saw that was smart from the customer we were working with is they knew how important it was to build these relationships to change the narrative. So in their goals as a department, they had all the goals that the department would normally have, but they added, we have to sit down and have meetings with 10 people outside of our department. That literally was their KPI goal for the quarter. And so they were actively pursuing to talk to people, because it's in those conversations that the narrative really begins to change. And I thought that was a really fun and very different way of tackling that problem.
Sorry to interrupt everybody. So I do want to, we are going to get to the people with the hands up, because I think this is so interesting and it's heartbreaking to interrupt just now. I've got to quickly get some notes in before the hour is up. Unfortunately, that's part of the job. But if you like the look of Localize's LQA feature, this is just to say that you can sign up to be a beta user. We're putting the link in the description right now, or you can scan the QR code if you're a kind of QR code person. I've always preferred links myself, but sign right up. It looks like an amazing feature. And then in addition to that, so we are running a free test for 10 people winners of our competition. So if you want to sign in and sign up, you can, we'll select a number of winners from the pool of people who sign up, and you'll get a chance to see how this kind of investigative QA works, where you're figuring out what might be blocking things in local markets. So you can sign up to either of those solutions. I'm going to just leave that on the board. Most importantly, do sign up to the second webinar. But now I'm going to hand right back over to Tom, who's had his hand up the longest.
Yeah, thank you. Really quick comment on that. As Talia mentioned, that basically going to new market, it's a horizontal initiative that you need to involve marketing, sales, support, product team, pretty much everybody. And if a company is not aware of what it really means for them, it's like a bet, it's investment. They need to do internal research, they need to do a market research, and they need to invest a lot. And especially in today's market condition, it bears some risks. Any investment is with risk, and everybody wants to eliminate the risk these days. So these days, it's even harder than any time, else speaking to leadership team about the potential inclusion of this localization and globalization into a strategic part of their thinking. Yeah, that's from me.
I'm going to pass to Talia now, but I'm also just going to read out another question, which maybe you can incorporate, but no worries if not. So Hillary asks, I'm hearing two different viewpoints on localization maturity. Some vendors which are focused on quality and automation, and some buyers who are focusing on positioning and strategy. Could you talk about the interplay between those ideas? I think we've heard those questions kind of crop up throughout the answers, but I'd love to hear it addressed directly. And the previous question. Over to you, Talia.
So to close the loop, or not to close, but to add to the former conversation, I think my experience has been, I've only worked in companies that have, their top corporate core objectives were international growth, new markets growth, and this is not enough. The top down can say that, but again, if the company is not set up for horizontal efforts alignment, for international efforts, this will not be implemented, right? So it's always been what I found very useful, and these are some of the initiatives I've done for internal evangelism and for propelling that growth within the company. I found that internal evangelism is the hardest part of our job, really, and but I found that doing two or three things. One is creating a Tiger task force. Where stakeholder leads, representatives, so the heads of each functional team across the company are represented in this. So it's like a board, if you like. And we meet once a month, once a week, however needed. But we talk about only international efforts. This is the alignment. And I would actually argue that the whole global ready mindset does not really differentiate between domestic and international. We're talking about the globe, right? The world. So so this really changes the mindset about how we operate our businesses. So if you think about, okay, our goal is to deliver products that are discoverable, usable, and valuable for the diverse populations of the world. What does that look like in terms of how our business operates, right? That's a very, very different conversation, very different outlook on driving internal efforts. And so a task force where that creates at the very least very close awareness with the decision makers, but also alignment within the stakeholders. And number two is, the actual designers, developers, marketeers, everyone in the company, they do want to eventually create the right experiences for their customers, but they often don't know what that means, right? So they assume that it's just a language thing. And so what I've done that I found was very helpful was actually in internal newsletters. I would create internal newsletters and provide and bring every week a new story from a real customer each time featuring a different use case in a different country, and what they love about the product, what they are challenged with the product, their gaps. And so that is.
Thank you so much, Talia. So I just wanted to jump in and say, because I'm aware that it is 1 minute past the end of the hour and over the time that we've allocated for the webinar. If you asked a question and it didn't get answered, if you asked it live during the webinar, we will be sending an email afterwards with the answer from at least one of us. So we will get back to you. Thank you very much. I'm going to just keep going another 4 minutes, but I'm going to hand over to Catel now because I know she's had her hand up.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to actually, I raised my head for something different, but I want to touch on Hillary's question. I think, you can't really blame vendors for being service oriented, because that's what they are. They're language service providers. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't be strategic in the way that they are driving their business, of course. But when you see, and I know what you're talking about, a disconnect between what the vendor wants to do and wants to talk about in terms of quality and what your stakeholders are telling you and the role of your business. It's up to you as a customer to also drive that conversation and guide what you need out of the vendor for your particular account. Vendors have to work with a lot of different customers who have different priorities, and so you cannot expect them to know what you want if you don't tell them. So yes, they will talk about language quality, and operationally these things are very important. Even if your business is telling you, well, let's measure quality as how your members or your users are engaging with the content, and this will tell us if it's good or not. That might be your KPI, but you need something internally, operationally, to be able to measure the performance of your vendor. So these conversations will be different, but it's also up to you to say, this is where the threshold in terms of quality is, and this is what I'm interested about. I'm not interested to talk about, the missing commas or whatever. I'm interested, for instance, about a holistic approach of quality and the impact that it has, on the business. So it's up to you to really drive that conversation to the vendor and details what you want your KPI for quality, for instance, to look like. Otherwise, they'll go with something that they understand and that they've tested before, and it's easier to fit in a box if you want, but that might not fit your purpose. Thank you.
Fantastic. Cool. So we're 3 minutes past. So I've got, in order to wrap up, what I'm going to ask from each of you is I'm going to ask one of the questions from the Q&A, but if you could each keep it to like a sentence, then that would be amazing. And then we will finish with that, because I think that it summarizes everything we've talked about so far. Kate asks, of all the things you've heard, which do you think is the most important driver of localization leadership? So if each of you would like to make a closing remark, and then we'll end the webinar. Does anybody want to?
The most important quality? I'm sorry, I missed.
The most important driver of localization leadership.
I would say adaptability and relationship building, ability to communicate effectively across different functions.
And what about yourself, Tom?
I would say money, because if company wants to grow, then obviously localization of the product and services into other markets, it's the way.
I love that answer, because unfortunately I think it might be true. Catel, over to you.
Yeah, plus one to that. I would also say, keep in mind what the goal is, and really understand what the context is and the business.
And finally, Ron, do you have any closing remark for us on driving localization leadership? Oh, Ron, I think you're muted there.
I was saying it never would be one thing, and what everyone has already said is 100% correct. It's about those relationships. It's about being able to get the money to do it. But you got to keep it to what the business actually cares about.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everybody who's joined us. I can see we're actually still hanging on to most of our participants, even though it's come to the end of the webinar. So that's great to see. I'm glad. I hope that that's an indicator that you enjoyed it. If it is, that's fantastic. Please do sign up to the next episode. That one is taking place at this time on the 12th of July, if I'm not mistaken, in a couple of weeks' time. It's going to be absolutely amazing. I'm really looking forward to it. And we'll send you a summary with all of the questions that we answered. So everything that was asked in the group chat on the day will be sent to you. Thank you again very much for participating. Thanks to all the speakers. And I am going to end the webinar now. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks so
Bye.
much.